Welcome to Uncultured Podcast. My special guest, Cheryl Parker. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Can you tell the audience a little about yourself?
Sure. My name is Cheryl Parker, and I work as an IT professional, actually, full time. And on the side, I do grief counseling and mental health workshops in the workplace. So I experienced a trauma 25 years ago when my 8-year-old daughter Rachel died suddenly from complications from a flu virus. And I was thrown into my own grief journey at the time. And while saying goodbye to my little girl, they asked me if I had considered organ donation because she was pronounced brain dead. And I recalled a conversation I had had with her 5 weeks before that, where I had been reading a newspaper article about a little boy who had undergone a lung transplant. And she was asking me some questions about what happened to him and where he got new lungs. I explained that somebody had died and offered to give their organs so that that little boy could live. And she went back to playing. And 5 minutes later, she popped her head up and said, "When I die, I want to give my organs so I can save kids." So, fast forward 5 weeks later, I am asked by the doctor if I've considered organ donation. And I said no, but she had. And the doctor's jaws dropped and the nurse's jaws dropped. And I told them the story. And in that moment of complete hopelessness, all I felt like I could do was fulfill on her wishes. So I had agreed to let them donate her organs. And through that decision, so many things rolled out into my life. Like I ended up being the national spokesperson for organ donation, and I was flown across Canada and spoke at different functions. And I saw during that time that there was a lot of people hurting and a lot of people dealing with trauma, a lot of people dealing with loss. And I just knew that I wanted to get to another place in my grief where I could actually help people because I just didn't want my loss to be about a woman sad about her daughter dying and that being my destiny for the rest of my life. I wanted this loss to mean something and I wanted to bring purpose to my life. So I have been working with clients for almost 20 years, walking them through the grief process, and then it kind of morphed into mental health, like a little more proactive approach to loss so that I just thought if I had the tools, I could have moved um, maybe faster or easier through the grief process than I did. And not to say that there's a right or wrong way to grieve, because there certainly isn't. There was just my way to grieve and I wouldn't change it for anything. But I just thought if people could learn strategies for self-care and for mental health awareness, that when they are struck with loss, that they would be maybe a little more equipped to deal with it. So that's what I am doing.
Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
You lost your husband too, right?
Yes, actually, 5 years after, no, actually, let me think about that. 10 years after Rachel died, my former husband died by suicide.
I'm sorry to
He,
hear that.
yeah, he never really got his footing after Rachel died, and he had some mental health issues himself. He was dealing with alcoholism, and yeah, he ended up taking his own life.
Sorry to hear that.
Mm.
Do you believe there's a apparent timeline for grief, or does each person's journey differ specifically?
Yeah, I don't believe there's a timeline at all. I mean, I think that a lot of people feel like you have to get through the first year, and I always think that that's such a setup because it's like I think people get this impression that there's a destination, like they just have to get through the first year and then ta-da, they're all good. But that is just so not the case. I know for me, I was 4 years before I actually put my head up and said, I'm going to survive this. And others around me said, "Oh, we always knew you would." And I thought, I didn't. I truly didn't. So I think it depends because so much is wrapped up in the grief, you know, like you bring your past experiences, your culture, your upbringing, your beliefs, your religion, your culture, like your personality, past experience, like you bring all of that to your grief. And depending on the relationship that you're dealing with and the type of grief, you know, there's just such a process to go through. So no, to me, I don't believe there's a timeline at all.
Me either. My ex-wife lost her mother, and I think she's still grieving to this day over it.
Mm,
And it's been
yeah,
over 10 years.
yeah. And you know, the thing is like there is healing, but the grief never ends. Like I believe I will always grieve my daughter Rachel, but the difference for me is that I believe you can get complete with the pain so that, you know, you're not living with the pain of the grief. Will grief ever end? No, I will always grieve my daughter, but the pain is not going to be running the show for me because I've done the healing.
What were the darkest moments in your journey through grief, and how did you manage to find your way out?
Mm. Well, I mean, I was like a dog with a bone. I was reading every book I could get my hands on. I was attending every workshop I could go to. I sought grief counseling. I talked to friends. I was working out at the gym. I was constantly putting one foot in front of the other, and it was the fight of my life. But it was also a very dark time in my life, too. I mean, I remember. Um, just laying on the couch one evening, resting, and my son come down the hall and said, "I miss Rachel." And oh, just hearing his little voice, because he was 6 at the time when she died, and this was a couple months later, and he had turned 7. So, you know, as this little 7-year-old, I miss Rachel, and it just, oh, it was like a stab in my heart. And then in the next breath, he said, "What's for dinner?"
Oh.
I remember like thinking, wow, like, I mean, his little I miss Rachel just took me out, you know, and then there was other times when I would do speaking engagements and I would tell Rachel's story about organ donation, and I would park my grief at the door and I would go and speak, and I was all inspired about telling the story, but then I would come home and feel so empty, and you know, picking up my grief on the on the way out the door, and then coming home and just feeling this emptiness. And I mean, I remember laying on the floor howling like a wounded animal, like just the physical pain of the grief. Like I was so surprised how physically painful it was as well as emotionally.
Thank you for that. So my next question is on misconceptions. What is the most common misconception about grief that you encounter in your work, and how do you address it?
Mm, oh boy. I know when I went back to work, everybody thought after a few months that you would be over it. And those words were like a knife through my heart. Like people would say, "Well, it's been 9 months. Aren't you over it?" And I remember thinking that I wasn't doing it right if I wasn't over it yet. So I think that's a misconception that there's like you said at the first, this timeline that people give your others permission to grieve if it's just a few months, but then after a while it gets uncomfortable for them to see you grieving, and then they want it to be over because they want you back to the way you used to be.
Do you feel some people just don't have sympathy?
I think the sympathy to me, it was like there was lots of sympathy in the beginning, but then the sympathy ran out with some. I believe. I think they may have like in some ways like felt sorry for me maybe, but to actually empathize and to give me space to grieve and heal on my own time, that that wasn't there. But I don't blame them. I think we're not educated about that. So we're not educated on how to grieve ourselves, and we're not educated on how to support others while they're grieving. And that's what the big, when I went back to work and I saw how uneducated we were about all of this, that's what motivated me to take on the educational approach. Like I said, I do grief counseling, but it's more like coaching and, like a guide, guiding you through your grief process because there is no education out there. And I wasn't really interested in becoming a therapist per se, but I definitely wanted to educate people.
Thank you for that. And this next question goes along with the educating others. Do you ever struggle with reliving your own grief while helping others do theirs? And how do you cope with that?
Yeah, I think because I am helping others, I think it keeps the conversation fresh and it keeps it real and it keeps it authentic. And so it always reminds me to walk the talk. I don't think that I could help somebody else through their grief if I wasn't dealing with my own. So, yeah,
Definitely, you gotta work through your own problems before you help somebody with theirs.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It would not be authentic. It wouldn't be real. And people see right through that. I mean, you got to be real.
All right, this next question is on mental health and employees and coworkers. What role does mental health in the workplace plays in the grieving process, and how can employers better support their grieving employees?
Yeah, I think it's so important. When I started to kind of shift gears into the mental health aspect, I started working with a company who had a lot of caregivers. So, like a community services organization with 600 employers or employees, rather, that were out there working in group homes, helping teen mothers, helping seniors, helping homeless people, and they were the caregivers and they were taking my workshop about mental health. And so often grief came up because many of these people were working in group homes with either handicapped people or mental health issues with their clients. And some of them died. And then it's their job to show up to work the next day and just carry on and support the next person. But meanwhile they're grieving because they got close to this person, and this person has been in their home for a couple of years and they've supported this person. So it's kind of one of those unspoken taboo topics. So bringing the mental health conversation to light was so paramount. And I was in that organization for a few years before COVID hit. And then, of course, the support workers through the COVID period were on the front line, and it was so stressful. And I remember the CEO telling me that they were so grateful that their employees had gone through my workshop and understood how to take care of themselves and their mental health because it made them champions through the COVID um, episode for years that they went through that. So it better equipped them for what they had to deal with.
Yes, COVID changed a lot of people's lives. I'm glad you
Yes, it
did to help
did.
your coworkers.
Yeah. And I still think that there is a mental health crisis, even though the the strain of COVID has passed. I think there is such a domino effect and a ripple effect that we are still recovering from.
Yes, you're so right. New York is crazy right now. You got
Mhm.
people like every other day. You got somebody getting stabbed in the streets or on the train.
Yeah,
You got homeless people. Homelessness is rampant right now.
yeah,
You can't ride the train without having somebody sleeping on the train or taking up five, six chairs because they stretched out on this train
yeah,
sleep. So you're so right
yeah.
about that. It's
Yeah, a
like
lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of marriages fell apart, their businesses fell apart, bankruptcy, financial issues, and and businesses like a year and a half later they're closing because they couldn't keep up with the debt that they incurred through that. So like we're still running through the ramifications of all of that.
yes, definitely. How did the loss of your daughter and at such a young age shape your perspective on life and death?
Mm. Oh, wow. I remember at first, like once you lose a child, all of a sudden you hear about other people that have lost a child. And it was like I was put into this club that I didn't want to belong in. And I hated it. I hated it. Um, but I was a woman of faith and I did lean on God through that time because I needed his strength. I knew that I couldn't do it alone. Um, but I also, knowing because of my faith, knowing that I would be reunited with Rachel at some point, that kept me going. But also, um, the phrase "life is short" is such a cliche, but when you bury an 8-year-old daughter, like life is short takes on a whole new meaning. And there were people in my life that couldn't handle, the devastation of it all. They would keep me at an arm's length, or, our friendship kind of drifted apart. And that was okay because it showed me who was going to be there for the long term. And the people that surrounded me and supported me through that 25 years later are still my inner circle. They're still my people. So, it really does help you um, cut out the crap, so to speak, and what's important, and priorities get clear, and your faith gets clear, and the people that you want to surround yourself in your life and who you want to be in your life, everything gets really, really clear.
Yes, it's hard to get love from others that's genuine. So I'm glad you were able to find that.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is on my good grief. What
Mhm.
are the core principles of the program?
Yeah, the core principles are number one, confidentiality. I create a safe space for the people who are working through their grief. And the other thing is that I invite them to be fearless because people walk through the door because they've had a certain loss, but we open up the doors and explore all losses in your life so that you can get a real picture of who you are in the face of loss and what has shaped your life and your values and your beliefs around loss so that you can better understand who you are. And then I give you the tools in order to move forward through that grief, and you learn a framework so that you can learn how to process those emotions, because until you acknowledge them and you express them, you can't resolve them. And so having a safe space, being fearless in your approach, and then processing those emotions, that's really what it's all about.
Thank you for that. How do you handle situations where clients feel stuck and able to move past their grief despite trying various methods?
Yeah, I'm just patient. I'll move along at their pace. Just like there's no timeline with regards to your grief process, I always tell my clients that, if they are stuck in a chapter or they need some more time, to take an extra week. And, we'll skip a week and let them just percolate with the questions, or like the workbook that I use as my curriculum. It's very interactive, and I ask a lot of questions because it's about their inquiry into their grief process. So, if they struggle with some of the questions or they're stuck, then they come to the session and we work through it together. So mostly, what I do is I just ask questions, and then they are able to process and come up with their own answers. It's not like I am, I'm doing a little bit of teaching, but it's mostly just me holding the space for them to do their own inquiry about it.
This is going to double down on the program part, your program. What are
Mhm.
the 7 stepping stones to reclaiming your life after loss? How do they help in the healing process?
Yeah, so the Seven Stepping Stones is it's an ebook that you can download off of the website. And it's for somebody who maybe isn't ready to actually work with somebody yet on their grief, but they're interested in what the journey would look like. So I wrote a seven stepping stones so that they can kind of dip their toe into the water and see, just try it on for size. And the first stepping stone is really just to identify. And again, that's to look at all your losses because until you identify what your loss is, you really can't, you know, do anything to resolve it. And then the next stepping stone is explore. So I have you, take a deeper dive into your losses so that you can again look at them from a different vantage point and then to just notice your good days, notice your bad days, and how you cope with those because it's good to understand what your coping strategies are and how you're moving through the process. And then respond is the next stepping stone, and that's your ability to see how you are responding to your grief because the only way that you're going to be able to move forward is to take responsibility for your response to the grief. Not that you caused it, not that you're to blame for it, not that you know um, it's your fault by any means, but the only piece that we can actually own and take responsibility for is our response to it. So that's a huge, huge piece of the journey. And then open. That's about opening your heart and being open to forgiveness. Sometimes there's a piece that you're not forgiving that person, or you're not forgiving the situation, or you're not maybe forgiving yourself for a situation or a loss or something that you're dealing with. So you never get through the whole grieving process without dealing with forgiveness. And then allow. It's about opening up your heart and allowing something else in. It's about letting go and letting go can feel like, oh, you want me to let go of my loved one. No, it's not about that. It's about letting go of the pain so that you can allow love back into your heart because quite often people are stuck in their grief because they don't want to let go, thinking that if they hang on their loved one, they feel close to them. And that was my case for sure. Like I wanted to keep Rachel close and I was okay with the pain because to me it's like if I'm hanging on to the pain, I'm hanging on to her. And it was actually the opposite. Because once I let go of the pain, then there was actually room in my heart for Rachel to come into my heart. And then I felt closer than ever to her. So that's a big one. And then recreate. I really believe that in the face of a loss that, you know, my biggest thing that I've mastered over the years, because I've experienced a lot of loss, but I've also been able to recreate myself in the face of loss. And I think that's the gift that I can give people is how to recreate. So going through all those steps allows you to get a taste of what it would be like to do your grief work with me.
Everything you said was very powerful. Hope the audience
Mm,
takes something from it.
thank you.
Do you work with children too?
I have worked with children. I worked with a little girl. She was 6, and her mother had died, and her grandmother had adopted her. And so I worked with the grandma, and I worked with the child, and that was a beautiful, beautiful experience to have her walk in and be very closed down and very matter of fact, and then have her open up and share her feelings and break down crying, and because she hadn't cried, and so just having her be able to create that safe space with me, and we did it through play and we did it through games, and we had a lot of fun. Actually, it was great. And I've worked a couple with teens, um, doing a mental health for teens program too, so that's also very fulfilling.
Yes, it's very supportive of you. Especially young people need guidance in their life, especially with the social media going on right now. What are the different grief styles you encounter, and how do you help clients navigate them? I guess this question means like grief could go in different ways. Somebody
Mm,
could be grieving, they could become alcoholic, or they could become
mm.
angry, they become violent or abusive. Can you explain different grief styles?
Yeah. So I think you're speaking to the coping strategies, right? Like
Yes.
how people cope. Yeah. So yeah, I just like my agenda is not to like if you come to me and I find out that, you're drinking to cope, my agenda is not to get you to stop drinking. Like, there's no way I could do that. Let me give you an example. So, there was a woman who did the course because her mom died and she was struggling. So, we're going through the course and we get to the section where we're talking about coping strategies. And she was, being fearless and being honest with her coping strategies. And she said, I spend all weekend in my pajamas watching home decorating shows. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm jealous. I want to spend the weekend in my pajamas watching home decorating shows. On the surface, it's harmless. But what she saw was that she was doing that to avoid dealing with her sister. So then that revealed that the struggle wasn't actually with the death of her mom. The struggle was with the strange relationship she had with her sister since her mom died. And how she was coping was to check out for the weekend and not even get dressed and just sit in front of her TV all weekend. So again, it's not my agenda to say, no more pajama weekends for you, no more home decorating shows. No, the what it was about was bringing the awareness to her. She found out herself that she was checking out and that the strange relationship with her sister was what she wanted to get resolved. So she discovered that on her own just by going through the chapters and answering the questions. So, that's how I cope with whatever you're going to bring to the table, and sometimes I had a woman who was angry, and she was like taking it out on her kids and I asked the questions and she worked through the chapters and she saw that she was angry and she had never admitted to herself that she was angry at her husband for dying of a heart attack because he wasn't taking care of himself. So once that got revealed, and once she got in touch with the anger, because women don't do anger very well, we're not programmed and conditioned to deal with our anger, so we suppress it and we blow up in inappropriate ways and different ways. It's like holding um, uh, um, a beach ball down under the water and then it's just going to pop up every which way, right? It's never going to come up gently. So just being open and again giving that safe space for them to get in touch with their anger and going through some exercises to find some appropriate ways for her to express her anger and then once the anger gets expressed, then there's room for love and then there's room for forgiveness. So whatever you bring to the table, whatever coping strategy you're dealing with, it just gets revealed as long as you are open and you're being honest with yourself, then we can deal with whatever you're going to come at this with. And no two people have ever done it the same. I mean, everybody is so individual how they show up.
Yes. I totally understand the story that you just told because I got a great aunt who lost her only son, and
Mm.
she would be saying sometimes, why he didn't take care of himself. I told him to go to the doctor, and, and not realizing, what she's doing, but she does it often, talking to herself about what her son should have did if he would have listened to him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I worked with another client and her son had died at 16 and it was 6 years later and she came to do my program and I thought, gosh, and she told me that she hasn't spoken about her son. There's no pictures in the house of her son. Like it's just like taboo. It's like not spoken about. Her marriage was on the rocks. Her relationship with her daughter was on the rocks. And I thought, oh gosh. what am I going to do with her? It's 6 years later. She's had 6 years of this behavior. Well, we started the course and she opened up her heart. And gosh, this woman, she recognized that there was some guilt that she was dealing with from an abortion when she was 16 years old that she got complete with. And by week 5, she was bringing photo albums and showing me pictures and telling me stories about her son after 5 weeks. And by the end of the program, she had hope for her marriage. Her daughter and her were talking again. Like, it's just like amazing, amazing what can happen when you are willing to open up your heart and look at what's really going on.
Yes. All you gotta do is try, and once you
Yeah.
try, results happen.
Yeah. You may come to the program with one loss, but it's not the first and only loss you've ever
Mhm.
had. So, we accumulate them and our coping strategies kick in and we're resilient. We're human. We bounce back. We cope and sometimes it's not healthy ways, but we have learned how to cope. So, it's there's an accumulation but we all have limits and it's about learning when those coping strategies are no longer serving you and just being honest with yourself about that.
I cut my family off for 4 years because I wasn't told that my great grandmother passed away.
Oh,
So she passed, and I found out by looking at a family member phone, and
oh,
I'm like, she passed, and she was in the casket too at that. So I'm like, she passed away, and like nobody told me, and like they're like, oh, we thought you knew. No, I didn't know. Like, and I stopped speaking to them because I felt like everybody went to funerals, everybody was talking about, everybody knew, and except me. And
mm,
I was I wasn't close with her. Like I wasn't. She lived in Jersey. I lived in New York.
hmm
But I, when I did was around her, I was the one, taking care of her, helping her to the
mm,
bathroom, cutting her steak or whatever meat she was eating, stuff like that.
yeah. And that hurts. That hurts.
Yes. So this next question, because you told the story of your husband, this next question is based on that. How
Mhm.
do you approach the topic of suicide prevention with those who are experiencing intense grief and depression?
Yeah, suicide, it brings a whole different element to the grief process. And, I've heard people say, well, grief is grief, no matter how they die. But I don't know. I think when there's suicide involved, there always seems to be an extra complication in the grief process. So I'm always really sensitive to that, and I, my approach always is compassion. I don't believe that they want to die. I believe with all my heart that they just don't know how to live with the pain anymore and they get to a point where there's just no choice for them in their mind. Because when I was going through my grief in the early stages, I was suicidal. Like, I really did not see any hope. I did not want to carry on. And I had a son, and so many people said, be strong for Sean, be strong for Sean. Well, I'm sorry. Like, I can't be strong for anybody right now, never mind my 7-year-old son. And I really thought in my heart of hearts that he would be better off without me. I thought that, he didn't just lose his sister, he lost his mom because I was completely lost. So I thought, you know what, he's better off without me. And I mean, obviously, I'm not in my right mind at that time. And I actually, I had a plan. I had a plan, which is not a good sign when you're suicidal because, I have done suicide training. And when they have a plan, it's like you need to intervene when they have a plan and you need to, like, um, interrupt that plan. And so I was even at the stage where I had a plan on how I was going to do it. So I was pretty far down the road, but I mean, I didn't, obviously. I'm here 25 years later. But so I have a lot of compassion for people who have had family members die by suicide. And I know that so many times it's guilt that people are dealing with. And anytime people are going through the grieving process and guilt comes into it, guilt is such a nasty, nasty emotion and it is so destructive. So, as soon as I get a hold of any knowledge that there's guilt, we are tackling that because there is nowhere for guilt to go other than get resolved. Otherwise, it will eat you alive. When Sean was 7, and I was trying to get him into a grief program. It took me 10 months to find a program for kids. And even at that, I lived an hour outside of Toronto. I had to drive an hour on a Tuesday night on a school night to take him to Toronto to get to a grief group. There was 10 kids in the group. 9 of them had lost a parent. He was the only one that had lost a sibling, but it was the best I could do. It was the only group that I could get him access to. But they did some artwork, and through the artwork, they identified that Sean had some guilt because Rachel died from complications of a flu virus, and Sean got the flu first, and then I got it, and then Rachel got it. So Sean, with his 7-year-old little brain, thought that he had killed his sister because of the flu. Now, a 7-year-old does not have the language or the understanding of the emotion guilt yet. You don't understand that emotion till later on in your years. I can't remember how old, but certainly not at 7. But it came out through his artwork. So we were able to nip that in the bud and get that resolved for Sean because the instructor had told us, my ex-husband and myself, that Sean was feeling guilty. So we were able to walk him through that process and explain to him that it wasn't his fault. But can you imagine if that wasn't captured and him growing up his whole life with the stigma and holding that guilt that he had killed his sister and that probably everybody thought that and he thought that and I mean that could have been just catastrophic. So I'm very in tune with guilt, with suicide, and I just have all the compassion in the world. When Pete died, um, Sean was so angry, and I was angry too. Like, he was an alcoholic, and I just thought, man, like, why didn't you choose to get your act together and be the father that I wanted you to be for Sean? I was terribly angry, but I also got that, he didn't choose to die. He just didn't know how to live with the pain anymore. And um, we had a memorial service for him, and I hosted it, and I paid for the whole funeral, even though we had been apart for years. But his family at the time wasn't stepping up to do it. So I was the ex-wife, and I had the son, and I wanted Sean to have closure and closure. I hate that word. I wanted Sean to have some kind of ritual to say goodbye and some kind of way to gather and to grieve and start his grieving process. So I hosted an event and was able to demonstrate forgiveness and love in the face of all of that and celebrate a man's life that deserved to be celebrated. And I'm very proud of that, that I was able to set my anger aside and stand in love and forgiveness and be a demonstration to my son for that. He was 16 at the time.
Okay. Why do you hate the word closure?
Um, I think it implies that grief ends, like you get closure and you're good now. I think that's
Okay.
why it bugs me. It's like, yeah, I just think there's a misconception of the word closure. It's like I understand what closure means. It's like you finish the process of the funeral um, event, but that all that does is allow for the grieving to start and the healing to start, right? So it doesn't mean that if you have a funeral and it's closure and it's like, oh, we're good now, we go home and eat a sandwich. you know
Okay. You mentioned that you had to find a support group for your son. So these next two questions go alongside that.
okay.
What role does community plays in the healing process?
Oh, huge. Absolutely huge. Oh my gosh. I cannot say enough about learning who your people are and who you can trust when you're going through the grieving process. I always tell people to figure out who your people are, and by doing that, like, it's all about bringing awareness to your life and who you are as a person. And when you're with somebody, do they make you feel better when you're with them, or do you just feel neutral, or do you feel worse after being with them? And and understanding those three categories and those people that are around you, you can then start selecting what you share with who, because you're going to have those kind of people in your life all the time. But the people that you feel worse with when you share things about your grief, they're not going to be the people that you open up to.
Mhm.
You can be pleasant, you can talk about other things, you can even tell them that you're sad, but you don't go much deeper with them, because when you do, you feel worse because they say things that don't make you feel good. And then there's the neutral people, and you can just have a laugh with them or spend time with them. And then there's the people that you can go deep with. Like, I had a friend that called me every single day to check in with me. And whether I was in a good place or whether I was crying my eyes out, she didn't care. And so you get to learn who can actually sit with your grief and be with your sadness. And so that is so paramount. And I was off work, so I did place myself in community all the time. Like, I went to a Bible study, and so I had a group of women that I hung out with, and then I had another woman that I met for coffee every Tuesday morning. And my friend from out west called me every day. And I surrounded myself with community all the time. And now sometimes I didn't want to be with people, and they would show up at my door and drag me kicking and screaming. But, in hindsight, I realize now that that was what actually saved me, was having community around me and pulling me towards life and choosing life.
Okay, thank you for that. How do you stay motivated and maintain your own mental health while helping others with their grief?
Well, again, I think it keeps the conversation fresh. When I'm facilitating these workshops, it's a constant reminder for me to be walking the talk and to be using the tools all the time. It's not a one and done. Like, I say to my facilitation participants, it's like, I'm going to teach you things, but you're going to be able to walk out the door and be able to use these right away. And I encourage them to use them and practice them, because nothing I teach is like, oh, you do this once and you're golden. No, it's a practice, and I learned that. And I actually had a concussion back in 2017, and I already felt like I was a self-care guru. But having a concussion and having to care for myself in such an intense way, that took my self-care to a whole new level. And I was dealing with different losses, with a concussion. It's like, a loss of routine because I was off work, and loss of um, freedom and independence because I couldn't drive. And I mean, loss of joy. And I love to read, and I couldn't sit and read a book. Like, there was just so many different losses that I was dealing with the concussion. So I had to be so gracious with myself. And I did eventually return to work after 6 months. And after a year, I was told that it was as good as it's going to get. But then 2 years later, I hit a wall again, and my brain was still bruised. And I was seeing a neurological optometrist, and I did vision therapy with her for 2.5 years to get my eyes to coordinate with my brain, because I was having vision problems. It was like I was underwater all the time and I had trouble reading. And by noon hour, I was like ready to do a nosedive into my keyboard. So, just working with that vision therapist and learning that I had to do these exercises every single day, because I thought, this is my brain. I'm not going to mess with my brain. So I was diligent with it. And through that process, I just saw that everything is a practice. You have to take care of yourself. And I returned to work, but I couldn't let go of these self care practices. I still had to make sure that I was walking away from the screen every half an hour to refocus my eyes and doing palming exercises where you rub your hands together till they're warm and then cup your eyes and do some, vision exercises and I have little tools that, to conquer the double vision and so you always have to be practicing your self-care so that those tools are there as soon as cuz life's going to throw you some curveballs. So if you're already practicing these self-care practices, then it's automatic. It just, you're just going to use it all, it's the trauma or the situation that you're dealing with in life, it's not going to take you down as far as it would if you weren't doing these self-care practices and these mental health strategies.
As long as you get the routine together, eventually it become a habit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay. What are the ways to honor the memory of someone who has passed away?
Oh, that's so individual. And there's like so many different ways you can honor them. Just something simple like having a picture out of them is honoring them. I've had women who talk to their husband's picture before they go to bed at night. Um, there's like anniversaries and stuff that people honor their loved ones, going to their favorite park. I know that my friend ordered a beautiful little cake on one of the anniversaries of Rachel and invited me over for cake. We gathered at the school actually on the first anniversary of Rachel's death. Her favorite color was purple, so I bought a bunch of purple balloons and I got a helium thing and all our kids from her class came and they wrote little notes and we put them in the balloons and we sent them up to heaven to Rachel. And then I had all the kids over for Christmas cookies and games at my house. So, you can do it can be cooking their favorite meal. It can be going to their favorite restaurant. It can be, it's going to be individual and it's going to be something that's personal to you. But whatever you do is going to make you feel good and make you feel connected to your loved one if it is in fact a death.
Thank you for that. Okay, my next question is it's because you mentioned your son blamed himself. So this next question go along with that. How do you help clients who blame themselves for the loss of a loved one?
Mm. Yeah, so how I deal with that is, when it comes up, um, have them challenge the thought, and have them explain how it is their fault. And usually talking it out, they catch themselves that it's actually not true. um, I used to think like I used to play the game what if and what if I did this and maybe I should have and you know uh, Rachel was at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, world renowned hospital and I was thinking, well, I should have known, I should have done this or done that and people would challenge me. It's like, really, you would know more than the doctors at Sick Kids Hospital. Hmm. And hearing that, it's like, oh yeah, that's a little ridiculous. And and when I try on the idea that I'm responsible for Rachel's death, I I can't believe that sentence because if it were up to me and I was responsible, there is no way that would have happened on my watch. No way. If I was responsible, wouldn't have happened. So when I realized the reality of that, it's like the rest of the morass of things that I think just melts away because it's like it's just not true. So, I don't like make them wrong for thinking that, but we just talk through it till they get to a point where they can see themselves that they're not responsible.
That makes total sense. I never realized and never thought of it like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you had control, why would you let that happen?
Yeah,
That makes
you
total
wouldn't. You
sense.
wouldn't.
Yeah, you wouldn't. You're right.
No.
Okay. What role does creative expression plays in healing from grief?
Oh boy, I think it's huge. I remember when I was off on bereavement leave, a couple of girlfriends of mine that were really, really good painters invited me to go to a painting class. And I laughed because I was not a painter and they were beautiful painters. And they just said, I don't care how bad you are, you're coming. And they picked me up and took me to this painting class.
Mm.
And I was like, guys, I cannot paint. Well, it was like they taught you step by step, and I did my best. And I always thought like my painting is terrible compared to theirs. But I'll tell you, the time flew, and we laughed through those painting classes, and we ended up doing it for years. And actually, to this day, those two girls and myself still get together and paint once in a while, and we do watercolors together. And so having a creative outlet like that was such a big part of my healing process. And I also love doing collages too, like just cutting out pictures from catalogs and from magazines and stuff, and putting it onto a board. That was another creative expression of mine. And Sean, when he was 7, that is exactly how he grieved. Like he played the piano, so he would write music about Rachel. He'd write a song and he'd play it on the piano. He'd write little stories about her. He'd like make little storybooks and draw pictures. And it was totally his creative expression that's how he grieved. So I'm a big advocate of that. And then I planted a garden in the backyard and we created a library, a little reading corner at the library at the school of Rachel's, and I painted a flower box and donated some Bibles to the church that she went to Sunday school. So, like, there was always creative things going on. We planted a tree at her daycare, and one of the guys at the daycare, he carved out "Fly with the Angels," Rachel, and put a big rock underneath the tree. Like, so creative expression has been a big part, I know, of our healing, and I'm a big advocate to encourage that in my clients as well.
Okay. If you don't mind me asking, how is Sean now? Like, how old is he?
Oh,
He's a grown man now, right?
he is. He's 32 now, and he still, oh my goodness, adores his sister. And because we've gone through what we've gone through with losing Rachel and his dad dying, like Sean and I are just so, so close. And he, like, on the anniversary of Rachel's death, I always like, how you doing, Mom? Are you okay? I had a bit of a tear today and thinking of you. And like, he's just so sweet about it all. And actually, last Christmas, he was home, and a friend of his, I got to tell you, um, so I've got their school pictures, and every year it was kind of ceremonial that Sean would take out his picture and put in the new picture in the frame. And when he got to be 8, the same as Rachel, it was like, wow, I'm the same age as Rachel now. And then when he was 9, it was like, wow, like I'm older than Rachel now. And then, as the years went by, it's like, wow, like she's been gone like longer, like she only lived to 8, and now like she's been gone 9 years, 10 years, 11 years, like just counting the years and that ceremonial change of the frame, and he's got all those pictures. Well, at Christmas time he was home, and he was showing his friend all his old pictures, and he put his 6-year-old picture at the front, and I left it there. And so it's still like I'm looking at it now up on the shelf there. There's a picture of Rachel, her last school picture when she was 8, and the picture of Sean and he's 6 on there. But yeah, so he went into acting, and he used to do little plays with Rachel all the time. Rachel would gather all the kids together and make up a play, and they'd perform it for the adults and stuff. And we do it when we go visited friends and stuff. And Sean ended up pursuing an acting career for years, and he said that he always contributed that to Rachel. And so, yeah, he's still adores his sister, wishes that she was here to kick his butt sometimes, but yeah, it's yeah, he's amazing.
Thank you for that. I understand a little bit of that. My mother had a sister that passed away when she was probably like 10 years old. So
Oh,
wherever they bring her up, they always say she'll be around such an age. One of my cousins, so she probably be I'll be 40 in 3 years, so she probably be like 45 right now
uh,
if she was alive. No, so they
uh,
always like, oh, she'd be around that age. She'd be around that.
yeah, yeah. Like
Understand
it's
that.
like it's like you age them as you go through life, you know? And I remember when my friend's daughter turned 21 and how she was commenting on how the relationship with her daughter had changed. And I remember saying, I said, "Oh," I said, I just felt a pang in my heart." And she goes, like, "Why?" And I said, "Because I didn't get the chance to like have a different relationship with Rachel, like you're experiencing with your daughter." And she said, "Are you sure?" And it just stopped me in my tracks, and I thought about it, and I thought, no, she's right. My relationship with my daughter has changed. Because you're right, like you age them in your life. Like she would be 34, and no, I don't get to witness her physically, but you know, my relationship with her has definitely transitioned over the years, and she's not too far away, I'll tell you that.
This next question is on the physical. How do you address the physical symptoms that often accompany intense grief?
Mm. Well, that is something that gosh, you're going to learn that because it is so physically painful. And I believe that the pain exists in the resistance to your grief. So the more you resist, the more physically painful it is. And I definitely was a resistor. Like I did not want to let go of the pain. And it was the resistance of allowing that grief in for me. And I remember my therapist saying, "Cheryl, you should just go into your room, close the door, and just cry your eyes out for 2 days and don't come out." And I bawled my eyes out and I said, "I can't do that." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "If I go into my room, I will never come out." And she said, "You will." And I mean, she meant it literally, but she also meant it figuratively. So when I went home, I allowed myself to let the grief in and cry and allow the pain and lean into the pain. And it was only then that the pain would leave my body and the healing could start. So I think everyone will get that lesson on their own time, but inevitably you have to give yourself grace and you have to give yourself permission to allow yourself to grieve. And I think society doesn't necessarily give us permission, so it has to come from within.
Thank you for that. This next question is along around the same lines. What advice do you have for those who find traditional grief support groups unhelpful?
Unhelpful?
Unhelpful, yes.
Oh, well, gosh, I went to a support group and I did not find it helpful at all. I remember, but understand I was in a very I was in the acute stages of my grief. I didn't have compassion for myself or others yet, and I went in there and I was very judgmental. And I remember a lady beside me asking me if I had cooked yet. And I said, "What do you mean, have I cooked yet?" and she's like, well, have you cooked a meal? I'm like, yeah, like every day. What do you mean? Have I cooked yet? And she said, oh, I lived on takeout for months before I ever cooked. And I was like, well, no, I cook because I have a son and he has to
Yes.
eat, and I
Yes.
can't afford to eat out every night. Like, I just thought that was the strangest question. And then I heard ladies talking about if they ever saw another lasagna again, that, they were going to pitch it out the window. And I was like, wow, like people are dropping off food at your house and you're that ungrateful. Like, I just thought these people are so ungrateful and so bitter and grumpy. And I just thought, I don't want to be this. Like, this is not who I want to be. And I was really judgy on them, but I knew that this is not what I wanted to be. And so I never went back to that support group. But having said that, I would never discount anything that I did in my grief process. And that support group meeting served its purpose for me to show me what I didn't want to look like years after my grief.
They do say misery loves company. You wasn't you
Yeah.
wasn't miserable. You was just sad, but they was miserable. So
Yeah.
you couldn't
And
join them.
Yeah, and I've had clients that have come to do the program that have raved about support groups. And so I would never discourage anybody from doing support groups. Like, I had a client and she was isolating herself, and I encouraged her to go to a support group, and she went with her friend, and they had such an amazing experience. And it was so good for her to get out with people and to relate to other people going through the same thing as she was. And so it definitely can serve a purpose for sure. And when I run groups too, I love the group dynamic that gets created. And you also get a chance to be a contribution to others in your own pain. You can kind of get out of your own way and be there for others. And it validates you too. It's like, okay, I'm not going crazy. Or you can get advice. It's like, oh, that woman tried this. Maybe I'll try that. Or yeah, that makes sense to me. So I would never discount a support group. But when you said, when it's unhelpful, I had my own example of when it was unhelpful.
Nothing wrong with that. What do you hope people take away from your book and workshops?
Oh, that there's hope and that there's healing, and that, you can rediscover the beauty of life, and that grief is not a life sentence and it's not a destination. It's something that happens, and that you can move through it, and that there is another side.
Where do you see my good grief in 5 years?
Um, well, I would love to have online programs and webinars so that I can create more community. When people approach me, they're ready to do their grief work, and a lot of people want to work one-on-one. And I love that sacred space that gets created with the women that I'm working with, or the men. Typically it's women, but I have worked with men too. I love that space that gets created, but I would love to reach more. So I would love to have webinars running on a regular basis and have a community thriving and people like supporting each other.
Okay. If I can do anything to help you, just let me know. Don't hesitate to ask. And I really mean that. So
Mhm.
don't hold me to it, okay?
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
No problem. So this game don't have a name, but I'm gonna explain it to you, okay?
Okay.
All right. So if you could be anybody, past, present, or future, for 1 year and come back with their knowledge, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Come back with their knowledge.
Yes.
Hmm. Oh, boy. Oh, wow. I love that question.
Take your time. Everybody does the same thing. They take their time with the question.
Yeah. Boy, oh, boy. Gosh, you know what? I'm going to say my daughter Rachel.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you want to bring back? The memories she had, the good memories she had.
Yeah, because she she just took life by the horns, and she just like she lived out loud. She was confident. Um she knew who she was and what she wanted, and yeah, she was bold, she was fun, and yeah, she was just a force to be reckoned with. And I just feel like with her crossing over, she has knowledge that we can't possibly have as humans. So I just think like she's probably got a world of knowledge and wisdom after crossing over, and I'd love to have that knowledge and wisdom.
It makes so much sense, and that was so much deeper than what I was thinking. That's amazing what
Yeah.
you said. And I was just the interview I had before you. We was talking about energy, like people like because energy, like people don't die. They just energy just changes
Yeah.
forms.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for that. You got any last words for the audience?
Um, any last word? Just whatever you're dealing with, seek healing because it is so worth it. Don't, you know, to struggle is a choice, and I just don't want anybody to live their life struggling. I want every soul to be healed in the world, and that's what I set out to do, one soul at a time.
Yes. All you can do is one go at a time.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Uncomfortable Truth Podcast. My special guest, Cheryl Parker. Thank you for joining me again.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here today.
No problem. I'll put all your information in the description so people will find you easily.
Super. Thank you so much.